Testing. Hello. This works. Good. Good afternoon. Is this working? Okay, good. The first part of our program people are still coming in, but the first part of our program today is our annual meeting, which we'll try to keep as short as possible because I know that the reason why most of you, if not all of you, are here is to hear the program about the March to Concord on April 19th, 1775. However, we do have a few things to take care of, and so this is basically our annual meeting. Before we have an election of our nominees for the board as well as officers for the coming year, I would really like to say a special thank you to our volunteers, without whom we certainly would not be able to exist. And so I'd like to just name as many as I can and what they do. And I'll do that by job, actually, so you'll hear some names several times. For accessioning of both archival materials and three-dimensional objects, a very important part of the work that we do. We have Beth Gray-Nix, Peggy Fredrickson, Ellen Morgan, Daphne Cox, George and Joe Kiesewetter, Stephen Loiketh, Judy Mara, Joan Scow, Ellen Niederman, and Remington Chu. Remington Chu was with the high school, and he was an intern for the whole year and very, very helpful. Our membership committee, that has been an extremely important part of our operation this year. And the membership committee not only enters new and renewed members and reminds them when their membership is due, but also this year produced two brochures that are marvelous. This is one for households, but they also developed a category called Community Partners for businesses. And they established various levels, you may have noticed, of categories for various levels of support, from Peter Noyes supporter to John Nixon champion and so on. And those people are members of the Founders Circle. And they actually last week, members of the Founders Circle, we've decided it would be nice to thank them for their support. And so we had a wonderful event at the home of Tony and Anne Marie Howes last Sunday. And as a result of this work, and by the way, there are brochures. If you haven't seen one or gotten one, please pick it up. It's at the table. But we had projected $5,000 to be received from membership dues this past year, because that's what we've received in the past. It went up to over $14,000 this year. So thank you all for your support. And those members are Sally Hild, Ellen Niederman, Ellen Morgan, Peggy Fredrickson. And Ellen, I also want to say, also organized both tours of the Sudbury Center on May 18th for the community, and the Sudbury Through Time for third graders. Publicity, you may have noticed that we have had wonderful publicity this year, both in the Town Crier, Sudbury Patch. We now have a Facebook page. And as a result of that, our programs have been extremely well attended. So Ursula Lyons, Ellen Niederman, and Sally Hild, thank you to you. The building committee, this is a very important committee right now because we're doing a feasibility study on the Loring Parsonage. And this committee meets pretty regularly with the architects to work with them and to make sure that what they are showing us is what we really want. So anyway, Stuart Hoover is the chair of that. George Kiesewetter, Sally Hild, Ursula Lyons, Joe Bausk, Peggy Fredrickson, Lee Swanson, Beth Gray-Nix, and myself are part of that committee. And the feasibility study, by the way, is being funded by the Sudbury Foundation, the Sudbury Community Preservation Committee, as well as the Sudbury Historical Society. And then we have the setups for our Sunday programs, this beautiful array. It doesn't just happen by magic, guys. And so we're so grateful to people who prepare the food, set it up beautifully, organize things, greet the sales table. And those people are Betsy Cutler, Joe and Jackie Bausk, Nancy Summers, Peggy Fredrickson, Beth Gray-Nix, and Tony Howes. And thank you to anyone here who does contribute refreshments because we really appreciate it, and it makes for a program, not only an interesting program, but an enjoyable afterward as well. Our finances, of course, the treasurer, Deb Keeney, but also Chuck Zimmer and Esther Mann, and George Connor, who is new to our group, who will become an advisor to us, and he prepared our annual report. And by the way, besides the brochure, there's also sort of a mini newsletter that's on the table, and I invite you to pick one up because it does summarize in a way what we've done this year, and it also it gives you our financial report, which you may find interesting, and it gives a list of our Founders Circle members as well as our family and individual members. So anyway, I invite you to pick that up and take it home with you. And then we have Stuart Hoover, our secretary, our newsletter editor, Peggy Fredrickson, who does so much every day. It's unbelievable. We literally would shut down without her. Our webmaster, Bill Andreas, technology specialist who manages our computer system, almost single-handedly, I would say, Chuck Zimmer. And our historian archivist, Lee Swanson. So let's give a hand to all of our volunteers, or give yourself a hand. Thank you. We had 3 fundraisers this year, which netted over $7,000, and that also contributed to our bottom line. The tag sale, the concert produced by Stephen Loiketh, and Stephen is here. That was wonderful. And an evening at Lotus Blossom, which I think garnered $425 for people that came and said that they were here. They were there with the Historical Society. And I have been asked, and of course want to, say that there will be another tag sale. It was so successful last year in October. I don't have the exact date of it. October the 18th. And we're asking people to look through your collectibles at home, and we will be collecting them. And do you have any information about that that I can leave with people, Ursula or Stuart? Where would... Okay. It'll be in the newspaper a week after this, so look for that. Great. So you can, the information will be available as to who to call and so on. So, wanting to keep this short, as I promised, it's time for our election of nominees for the board, as well as officers. So let's start with the nominees for the board, and our chairman of the nominating committee is Peggy Fredrickson, another one of her hats, and I'll give the mic to her.
We have 2-year terms for boards, and about half the board gets replaced each year. The people who are continuing on the board this year are Ruth Griselle, Peggy Fredrickson, Stuart Hoover, Joe Bausk, Sally Hild, Ursula Lyons, and Ellen Morgan. Um, then we have nominees for 2-year terms, returning members, Debbie Keeney, Ellen Niederman, Beth Gray Nix, and Nancy Summers. And as a new board member, if you would stand up, if you're, I know Daphne's here. Daphne over in the back will be a new board member. So that's our nominees for board.
Are there any other nominees? If none, then I call for a vote on the slate of nominees. All in favor say aye. And opposed? Okay, Peggy.
And now from the board, we nominate officers. Officers are for a 1-year term because of the on and off business with the 2 years for the regular term. So for 1 year as officers, and can you stand up, please? President Stuart Huber. Vice President Joe Bausk. Secretary Ruth Griselle. And Treasurer Deborah Keeney.
Are there any nominees from the floor? Seeing none, I would say that I call for a vote on the slate of nominees for officers. All in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay. Then all business being accomplished.
I think that, did we have an announcement about other 370?
Yes, we do. Hal Cutler. And I have that written here. I didn't quite know where to put that, Hal.
Well, as you know, this is Sudbury's anniversary year. 375 years ago on September 4th, 1639, the town of Sudbury received its incorporation from the General Court of Massachusetts Bay Colony. We are celebrating all year, as you've been aware, programs here, a wonderful slate of programs here at the Historical Society, but also programs sponsored by others. And I want to point out, I've got 6 in my mind, but there's 3 that are immediate. Next weekend on Saturday night, the 14th, St. John's Lutheran Church will be having a wonderful concert, vocal concert as opposed to instrumental, at 7:30 in the evening that I'm sure they'd love to see you at. It's a free concert, I believe, although the poster outside would confirm that. On Sunday afternoon from 1 to 4 p.m., Memorial Congregational Church will be sponsoring a strawberry social in Heritage Park across the street. Bring your kids and grandkids because we'll have sack races and 3-legged races and a tug of war. And we may even throw the adults into the tug of war if we can get a couple of opposing teams. And then on Wednesday, June 25th, we have a late development, shall we say. A gentleman named Christopher Starr from Sudbury, England, is going to be in the States and offered to give us a history lesson about Sudbury, England, Sudbury, Suffolk, England, with an emphasis on the time period from which the immigrants in East Anglia, that part of England, came here to Sudbury in the 1600s. That's going to be at the Goodnow Library in the community meeting room there on the evening of Wednesday, June 25th. There will be some publicity out about it, but we hope you'll keep that in mind, especially an audience that enjoys Historical Society presentations. And then, of course, later in the year, we have an August 23rd Community Fair Day right here in Sudbury Center in multiple buildings around here. And on September 6th, the Field Day at Lincoln Sudbury, which we will conclude with fireworks for the first time in about 40 years here in Sudbury. So we invite you to all of those activities, and also check our Facebook page or go onto the town website. The Facebook page you can find by looking for Sudbury Celebrates 375. You can look under the committee listings on the town website for the schedules of events. And Ellen Niederman, one of our members and the publicity person, has another thing to say. The garden club tour is June 14th. That would be next Saturday as well. That's right. You can see some posters around. Thank you.
There is something that I was remiss in not doing, but thank goodness I remembered as I was sitting there, which is to have a little something for our outgoing board members who have been here for quite a while and are leaving, unfortunately, very sadly. So we have something for each of you. Tony Howes. Tony, you're here. Yeah, there you are. Do you want, and Betsy Cutler. And is Esther Mann here? No, okay. Tony, you're not getting flowers, unfortunately. You're getting scotch. I'm so sorry. I hope you like it. Words can't describe how much.
Yes, appreciate all the things I've been able to do with you all, and we will keep staying in touch.
But you are going to be with us still. You'll be around, and so will Betsy. Thank you so much, both of you.
I'd like to just take a moment to give a big thanks, especially to Ruth. Ruth, in 2 years, has done amazing things for this society. The reason we've been so successful where we are today is because of Ruth's leadership. And it just goes on and on what she can do. And rather than give a long list, we commissioned a unpublished unknown poet to write an ode to Ruth. For what it's worth. You get what you pay for. An ode to Ruth. Oh, Ruth Griselle, you've done so well. You've really upped our game. Oh, Ruth Griselle, I'd like to tell what's happened during your reign. You've taken a group of disparate minds and brought them all together, gotten them to focus on what is important and not the with and ever, not the if and the whether. You've taken us from deep in the red to solid financial stability, perhaps a parsonage and a barn, a museum and a new facility. Oh, Ruth Griselle, I hope you would tell what your secrets are for moving along this motley group, moving as long so far. And one other item.
Overwhelmed. I'm totally overwhelmed to have a poet among us. And believe me, without this fabulous board and all of the volunteers that I mentioned, none of this would. Oh,
Ruth,
my
this is
goodness.
just a very small token of thanks
Oh.
for all you've done. Can I put that
Thank
down?
you. I'm just overwhelmed. Thank you so much. And I'm passing the torch on to a very worthy person. So thank you, Stuart.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to ever fill Ruth's place in this society, but luckily she'll be with us and take on her previous job as secretary. Okay, our speakers today are going to tell us about the what really happened in 1775. We've got Dan Meenan, and he will also introduce George Quintel. So, Dan, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stuart, for that very kind introduction. And thank you on behalf of my co-presenter. I would like to thank the Sudbury Historical Society for inviting us here today. This presentation has given me the excuse to look into something that's been on my mind since I was 13 years old. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But right now, we thought it would be good to start with a movie, a video of what happened on Northbridge this April 19th past. And so if I can just, If you'll bear with me while I get this started up again. I long for the days of slide projectors and overhead transparencies. This technology is wonderful, but it has its limitations. When you give a presentation with a carousel projector, there's nothing that says you need to scan the file first before you display it. automatic loop. Okay, time to begin. This presentation is based on a booklet that was put together in 1975 by many hands, but it was written by Ira Amesbury. Some of you may remember Ira. This was a 5.5 by 8.5 saddle-stitched book done on a photocopier and self-mailer to hundreds of people in Sudbury. We don't know how many of these booklets still exist, but I was fortunate enough to come across one a couple of years back, and I was quite impressed with the scholarship and with the quality of the writing. Many of you know Ira as a poet. Well, he is that. He was that. We lost Ira. And so the booklet also contains a map of the ways they went, also put together by Ira Amesbury and another Minuteman, George Max, and copyrighted 1975 by Forrest Bradshaw. And my co-presenter and I decided to go back and look at the sources and see if any new scholarship had come to light in the 39 years between the time this booklet was published and today. And we started with the 20th century. We started, can you hear me? Yeah. Was that this mic? We started with the 20th century authors, David Hackett Fisher, who published his book Paul Revere's Ride in 1994. Our friends John Powers and Kurt Garfield and Allison Ridley, who wrote their books in 1988. Then we went back to the 19th century and we reread Alfred Sereno Hudson. And then we went to the 18th century and read the Thomas Stearns papers at the Goodnow Library, and we found accounts by the Reverend Ezra Ripley and many others. And the fellows who put this booklet together did it 95% right. And the only place where they didn't have the scholarship was right up in this area in the north. And I'm going to skip to that portion of the presentation because I think it's the most important part of my presentation. And I really want George to have enough time to make his presentation. I took this map and pieced together out of modern atlases this map. It's got essentially the same information. All the green dots represent militia or minute commanders. All the blue dots represent bridges. The yellow dots represent places where we believe the minute companies on both sides of the river gathered. And the red dots represent places where the written record says they were. And I think before I start with the maps, I'd like to say that this is one town separated by a river. You've got the east companies on this side, you have the west companies on this side. What we are in now is West Sudbury. What Wayland is now used to be East Sudbury, separated by the Sudbury River, and they sent, both sides of the town sent men north into Concord to engage the British on April 19, 1775. I'd like to read, though, the description of how that happened in Ira Amesbury's words, because try as I might, I couldn't have done it better. This is Ira Amesbury, the ways they went. Nobody knows for dead sure how the men from Sudbury went that morning. Nobody ever will, probably. But if the people of this town were at all what we think they were, they most likely went the straightest, fastest, surest way to the enemy. They meant to drive from their land. So Isaac Loker's troop of horse and Captain Joseph Smith of the East Side Militia and Captain Nathaniel Cudworth of the East Side Minute Company assembled their men at the East Side training field and marched as straight north as they could go. They got to Hardy's Hill about when the retreating British did. Lieutenant Colonel Howe met the Minute and Militia companies of Captain Moses Stone and Captain John Nixon at the Sudbury Common Training Field. They marched, in their fashion, north. On their way to Concord, they were joined by Captain Aaron Haynes and his company, and some of the men of Jabez Puffer's alarm company. Too old are we, snorted the alarm company, and marched as briskly as men half their ages. At Duggan's Corner, Lieutenant Colonel Howe left them to reconnoiter toward the North Bridge. The men stopped, argued briefly whether to enter Concord by the South Bridge, decided to follow orders, an odd decision for Sudbury men, and advanced to within sight of Colonel Barrett's farm. There, Lieutenant Colonel Howe rejoined his men. The companies moved on to the North Bridge, crossed the Great Meadows beyond Revolutionary Ridge, engaged the British at Merriam's Corner, fought them at Hardy's Hill and the Bloody Angle. Now the whole Sudbury force was together again, telling each other wild tales of their own heroism and cracking the same ribald jokes about Loker's horses that we still tell today. And now the edges began to be chipped off the sharp triumph of the day, as Josiah Haynes died, and Joshua Haynes was wounded, and Thomas Bent was wounded, and Asahel Reed died. As we said, nobody knows how the men of Sudbury went, except we know that they went bravely and willingly and freely. That, my friends, is poetry. Now, we know that moment. Here we go. This would never happen with a slide projector. I'm sorry. This will just take a moment. General Gage in Boston believed that 4 brass cannon that had been stolen in September of 1774 had been secreted away at Barrett's farm in Concord. He was very eager to get these cannon back. It was a great embarrassment, and it was also, these were quite lethal artillery pieces, and he was very eager to have them returned. So he sent his party 700 or 800 redcoats to capture those cannon and anything else of value that they could find. And this is where they were headed. But the militia commanders knew that the cannon had been removed already. So instead of heading for Barrett's farm, the militia and the Minute and the horse troops of all the surrounding towns were heading for Concord. They were going to the center of Concord to the rendezvous point, which was Wright's Tavern. This is Lucidaris from the National Park when one of these cannon was returned recently. It had been hanging for many years in the top of the Bunker Hill Monument, and by special arrangement, that cannon is now at the National Park Visitor Center, the North Bridge Visitor Center. So everyone, all the provincials, all the patriots are heading for Buckman's Tavern in Concord Center. I'm sorry, Wright's Tavern. They're heading for Wright's Tavern. So in the interest of brevity, I'm going to fast forward through East Sudbury to West Sudbury, and we'll circle back there if there's more time. Here we go. So this is a segment of the beautiful 1794 map of Sudbury done by Matthias Mossman, which, if I am correct, is for sale here today. And this is just the very northernmost part of Sudbury in 1798. Now, the General Court of Massachusetts ordered that every town produce a map. And it's a boon to researchers, because every town has a 1794 map. You know, certainly it was 19 years after the 1775, but they are still very useful because the maps didn't change much back then. In fact, they don't change much today either. You can still get around looking at an atlas from 50 years ago. So what we have here to orientate you, this is Concord Road coming up from Sudbury Center. This is the road to Sherman's Bridge. This is where Lincoln Sudbury is right now. We head north to Haynes Road, where Bowker's store still exists today. You notice that Concord Road does not hook to the west and go over to 9 Acre Corner or through Nishotic. It's not there. So we head north, crossing Route 117 about here, heading north up Dakin Road, Pantry Road. 117 wasn't there either. And we go up Dakin Road and past the Leap School, which was Elroy Hars's farm back in the 60s. And we cross into Concord at the town line. Now today, we fire a salute into Concord at the town line because we're not allowed to fire our muskets in Concord. We fire all through Wayland, and we all fire all through Sudbury. It's not just us. They don't allow anybody to fire in Concord anymore. But being Sudbury, we tweaked their noses a bit, and the photographer was standing probably right behind the Concord police cruiser, our escort who picks us up at the town line. Now we're into Concord, and we have a 1794 map. This one done by Ephraim Wood, and it shows most of the roads and the rivers. And you'll be seeing this as I go through the maps. You'll be seeing that this shape repeats itself over and over. It's one of the things that never changes. The Assabet River flows in from the Maynard area. The Sudbury River flows in this direction. They meet at Egg Rock, and they form the Concord River, and the Concord River flows north to the Merrimack. So if you ever need to try and figure out where you are on these maps, look for that shape, and that'll give you a pretty good idea. This spot right down here where my pointer is Duggan's Corner, and this is where things start to get interesting. Now this is an 1830 map, annotated, we think, by Palmer True, who was a Sudbury militia colonel. We think he annotated this in the 1990s. We just lost Palmer last April, and I wish he were around so we could ask him if he was the man who actually made these notes, but we think it was Palmer. So, Duggan's Corner. What happens at Duggan's Corner is remarkable. The Sudbury column is moving north. They get stopped at Duggan's Corner by Stephen Barrett, the son of Colonel James Barrett, with new orders. Stephen Barrett says, "You must come to the farmhouse immediately." with all possible haste. Remember, they had been heading for Concord Town and Wright's Tavern, and to do that, they would have been crossing the South Bridge. So they had been making for the South Bridge. New orders. So Stephen Barrett rides back to the farmhouse. Colonel Ezekiel Howe, the commander of the Sudbury group, we think goes with him, because we know he goes off to the farmhouse very soon after these orders have been changed. And he leaves Captain Nixon in command. Now, soon after Colonel Howe rides off to the Barrett's farm, Deacon Josiah Haynes gets in his face, gets in Nixon's face, and says to Captain Nixon, "I don't think we should follow this boy's orders. I think that we should go on to the South Bridge like we planned." And we have this from the Thomas Stearns papers from the day. They're down at the Goodenow Library, and Kurt Garfield picked this story up and published it in his book in 1988. Deacon Haynes is either 79 or 80 years old. The reports conflict, but he's an old fella, and he should have been with the alarm company back in town defending the town. But he decided to march along with the militia. So he confronts Captain Nixon, and he speaks his mind. And Captain Nixon is a veteran of Louisburg and the French and Indian Wars. He is unruffled. And he says, "No, I think we should follow orders." And Haynes says, "If you don't go and dislodge those redcoats from the South Bridge, I shall call you a coward." And Captain Nixon says, "I should rather be called a coward by you than be brought up on charges of insubordination for disobeying a direct order." So Haynes rides off in a huff to the South Bridge by himself. Nixon continues north with the Sudbury column and looking for a crossing of the Assabet River, because to get from Sudbury Center to Barrett's Farm, one must cross the Assabet River. It was then as it is today. The difference is today, we never notice we're crossing the Assabet River. The bridges are hardly noticeable on the modern highways. So this is a detail of the map that Ira and George Max drew. And this is where George's scholarship and mine differ with what they knew back in the 60s and the 70s. They have the Sudbury men crossing open fields and swamps and crossing the Assabet at a place where there was no bridge. Now, it was supposed that there used to be a bridge there, or they crossed a mill dam or a log jam, or perhaps they waded across the Assabet during the spring flood. That does not seem likely. And yet, the map says that's the way they went. It also says that they bypassed a perfectly good bridge right there. And so, in 1965, the Boy Scouts were recruited to build a canoe pontoon bridge across an unknown spot on the Assabet River. And canoes were borrowed from Camp Resolute, and lumber was donated by Ben Walker Sr., and the bridge was built, and the bridge worked perfectly. You may have heard stories about crossing the Assabet at other times in other years by the modern companies that weren't quite so successful. But this bridge was so successful that we were asked to do it again the next year. I was one of those Boy Scouts. I was 13 years old, and I helped build that bridge. And I always thought, why are we crossing here? Weren't there bridges back then? But I didn't have the time to do the research then. I do now. This looks like a typical construction project, doesn't it? One guy working and 4 guys watching, probably telling him what he's doing wrong. And so we're back to the 1830 map and Palmer True's annotations. You see that Palmer True, he's got his doubts too, because he has a dashed line with a question mark heading to the same place that was in the previous map. He has a solid line with a question mark followed by a dashed line with a question mark heading for a spot on the Assabet River opposite Barrett's farm. And he has a dashed line with a question mark going across the Derby Bridge up to Barrett's farm, which is located right here. In looking at the report by the Reverend Ezra Ripley, we think that the Sudbury men probably took the Derby Bridge. The guys back then didn't want to get their feet any wetter than we do nowadays. And Reverend Ezra Ripley back there in the 18th century says the orders were to go round to the farm. So instead of crossing open fields, woods, swamp, and missing Barrett's farm, and doing the same thing here, we really believe that they crossed the Derby Bridge and they followed these roads up to Barrett's house. So Colonel Howe, Ezekiel Howe, he said, meet me at the Barrett's house, and they did, just out of sight of the redcoats who were tossing the place. They were going, looking everywhere, because they had been told there was some valuable stuff there, including the cannon, and they found hardly anything. They pretty much came back to Boston empty-handed. So the Sudbury men were observing the goings-on at Barrett's as the regulars withdrew, heading for the North Bridge. The battle at the North Bridge happened while Sudbury was observing Barrett's and before the redcoats who were searching Barrett's arrived at the bridge. So there was the battle. Then the advance party that was at Barrett's came up to the bridge. The regulars withdrew across the bridge. The companies of Minute and Militia, Concord, Carlisle, Acton, Westford, followed the regulars across the bridge. And then Sudbury came along a bit later and crossed the bridge too. And they all, okay, that's a detail from the 1794 map. You'll see that there's a bridge here. This is Derby Bridge, or Derby Bridge, right here. This is the Union Turnpike Bridge, as it was known about 10 years later. We believe this bridge wasn't there in 1775. This map was made 19 years later as they were planning the turnpike system through Cambridge, Lexington, Concord, and on to Fitchburg. So this bridge in 1794 was called the Other Bridge over North River. That's what this says here. But we believe the Sudbury men turned here, crossed the river at the Derby Bridge, came up this way, came to this intersection, which is now the Concord Rotary. The dreaded Concord Rotary was a 3 corners at one time, then a 4 corners, now a 5 corners. And we also noticed that these maps that were commissioned or demanded by the General Court of Massachusetts, they don't include all roads. In fact, some of them just include county roads. If they do include a town road, it's labeled as a town road. Then as now, nobody wanted to pay the surveyor for more work than was necessary to meet the law, and the surveyor didn't want to do any work that he wasn't going to get paid for. So, not all the maps, not all the roads are there, but the bridges are. This is the Derby Bridge today. And we hardly notice it because it looks like this on top. This is Route 62 passing into West Concord from Route 2 near the Dunkin' Donuts and the fire station. And usually we're trying to keep our bumper off the bumper of the fellow in front of us. and so we don't really notice it. There's the objective as it appeared about 4 or 5 years ago, rescued at the last moment by a private group. It almost fell in. Thank goodness it didn't. So Sudbury marches past there. They march to the North Bridge. And when I say Sudbury now, I'm talking about the men from West Sudbury. They cross the North Bridge. This is as it appears today. And then they follow their patriot brothers in arms, not down the Bay Road, which is the road that the Redcoats are using to retreat to Boston. They pass along fields and paths to the north of Revolutionary Ridge. And this blue line indicates the path that the Patriots took, while the Redcoats retreated down the only road they knew and the road that they had come by. The regulars went this way. The Patriots took a shortcut, and they met up at Miriam's Corner. There was an exchange of gunfire. And that's where the running battle that we've all heard of began. And the Redcoats were hounded from Tanner's Brook all the way to Charlestown on that day. This is Miriam's house as it looks today. This is the marker at Miriam's Corner. And on to glory. I'll close with 2 of my favorite quotes that came to light during the course of my research. One is this, that's in the parking lot at the North Bridge. The thunderbolt falls on an inch of ground, but the light of it fills the horizon. Ralph Waldo Emerson during the centennial, 1875. And here's another one I discovered. And so with that, I'd like to turn the program over to my colleague, George Quintal, Jr. George, we are so lucky to have George with us today for many reasons. But the biggest reason is George has made a life's work of studying the first days of the War for American Independence. For 40 years he's been studying this subject, and he knows more than any man alive about what happened in the communities that sent men to Battle Road on that day. He's also the only guy I know who has a nearly complete 17-volume set of Soldiers and Sailors of Massachusetts, whereas I have a 40-volume set of Liberty's Kids, the Saturday morning cartoon. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to George, my co-presenter and colleague, and George, take it away.
Everyone feels like standing up and stretching for a second. You're welcome to do that.
Get you into your program. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Just need to remember. We'll go full screen. No, there's. I practiced this.
Click on that.
Okay, I am clicking. Right. So, what I do is find the command that I found does work. From the beginning. There you go. And now you should be able to toggle left, right, left.
Up, down.
Yeah, well, I don't use up, down.
I do.
Okay, if you know how to do it. Okay. Microphone? Yeah, where you want to use? Well, this should be live. Okay, good. Yeah.
Thanks all for coming, and thank Dan for a great job on the route. He's worked really hard on it. We've driven around and around and around town trying to figure this thing out, and he's worked hard. Dan was last year's colonel of the Sudbury Minutemen, so he's a special place in town here. I'm going to talk more about the men themselves. This is what I've studied my whole life, and if you want to come up and take a look at it afterwards, these are the Sudbury men, and I have 30 of these notebooks, one for each town, which makes a little over 4,000 men. And I've done a genealogical search on all 4,000. So it's taken a long time. That's okay. But the key thing is I have a database now with more than 100 fields for each man. So I have 100 points of data for each of these 4,000 men. I don't know if you multiply that, what it is, but so I can query this database.
I'm going to give you the lav. So if you step away, they can still hear you.
Okay.
Put it in your pocket.
So if you query the database, you can query just about anything. And I want to thank Lee Swanson and so many people who helped, the reference librarians at Goodnow and Dick Hoyt, so many people. I do want to say hi to Ruth and Joe Brown, too, special friends. So you query this database for anything, and Lee asked me the other day, what percent of the men were married on April 19th? And so I went to the database and did a quick query, and I have so far found that 113 were married, which surprised me. I thought it would be less. And so you can find things out, strange things like that, and compare the different towns, and that's what I'm going to do in this talk. By the way, that's Deacon Josiah Haynes' gravestone right in the cemetery right outside here. He was the oldest man killed the day of the battle, and he was from Sudbury. He was 78 years old. His birth date was 1696. So the oldest man wounded was also 78 years old that day, so the old guys were really out there in strength. Preparations. Many years ago, Tony Fredericks showed me this at the Wayside Inn, and I just want to read this down at the bottom. This is an old document. Some of the men did not have guns, and it turns out that 12% of the Sudbury men did not have guns as of March, 1 month before. This is pretty serious when 12% of your men don't have guns. So the selectmen got in real quick gear, and somewhere, I don't know where, they found muskets. And I think that pretty much every man was prepared. So here's one of the guys that picked up a musket that day. His name was Ephraim Smith. These are to certify that I, Ephraim Smith, have received of Jacob Reeves, as one of the selectmen of Sudbury, a gun and a bayonet, and that was also unusual, of the town stock, which I promise to return to the town if not lost in battle. Now, this man was thinking ahead. I mean, this was 2 days before Lexington conquered, and he already was thinking they pretty much knew what was going to happen here. It was not a surprise. But he got his gun just in time. The alarm. As the 800 British were coming out from Boston, we already had a system. We had warning riders on horseback, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and many, many, many more. Warning bells. The British heard the bells coming out. They heard bells in every direction. And I think in modern terms, they probably said to each other, uh-oh, we thought this was going to be a cakewalk out here. What's going on? They heard warning guns, cannons, and the strangest thing to me is that the Patriots had already figured this out. On high hills all around this area, they had pre-built these piles of dry brush, and when they got the alarm, they started these hills, brush fires going, and the British also saw those and mention it in their journals. The Battle of Lexington happened, and just shortly after that, Joseph Pierce Palmer, who was the leader of the Committee of Safety, in charge of alerting all of the surrounding towns and even further of what was going on, he sent out a letter at 10 o'clock. And this is 5 hours after the Battle of Lexington. And he already knew a great many of the details. He had it pretty well. He said the British killed 6 and wounded 4. The British actually killed 8 and wounded 10 on Lexington Green. So he had Israel Bissell charge off and take this letter as far as man could go. And this letter eventually, not by Israel Bissell, but by everyone else, made it all the way down to South Carolina. So the alarm was being spread through all of the colonies. This is the actual letter that was started, and this is in the Masonic Museum in Lexington. They let us use this. Here's the 13 colonies at the time. You can see they hugged the coastline. Population of the colonies at that time, 2,600,000, 500,000 slaves. The population of Sudbury, approximately both sides, 2,100. And if you figure it out, the population of Sudbury was 1,000th of the population of the United States. Not the United States, but the colonies. So if you extrapolated that today, Sudbury would be about the size of mainland Boston. So Sudbury was a significant town back then. Who responded to this alarm going in all directions? Militia. All men in town from 16 to 60. From the militia, the Minutemen were set off. The youngest, fastest guys in the best condition with the best weapons. 25% of the militia were set off as Minutemen to respond at a minute's notice. Light horse, these just appeared out of nowhere. Sudbury had them, Lancaster had them, Concord had it, but it was somehow disbanded and nobody understands it that I know of. Artillery, Weston had an artillery company, but no artillery that I know of. Alarm, these are guys like me, too old for the militia even, above 60 years old, disabled men, men who were exempt, like the school teacher in Acton was exempt for being a school teacher. He was also exempt because he cut off his foot in a firewood accident. But guess what? These guys showed up anyway, and this man, a double exempt, was killed at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Warning riders heading in every direction, rangers, there were even ranger units out in the Brookfield area, and many, many volunteers, of whom one was called the White Horse of Death. And if you've never heard of him, he was ranging up and down Battle Road on a white horse. He would stop on a high piece of ground, put his gun on his horse's saddle, and take aim, and he got a British soldier almost every time he took aim. And they went after him. They never got the man. He was from what's current-day Winchester, Massachusetts. These are all of the towns and areas that responded to the Lexington alarm. And I estimate, if I add up all of the men from these areas, that as a result of the alarm that day, 20,000 American soldiers responded to that alarm. Now, of course, they didn't all make it. Some of them were running full speed. 4,000 made it in time to fight the British. And here are the 30 towns that responded and actually fought the British. You can see Sudbury there. Sudbury had 3 militia companies, 2 minute companies, 1 alarm company, and 1 light horse company for a total of 7 companies. That's pretty significant. The only towns with more there you can see are Danvers and Dedham. I have to wait for questions at the end if you'd please hold it. So there are 85 companies that responded and fought the British that day, different types. And here are the towns that responded with the most men, and Sudbury's right there at number 5, but I keep adding a few men, especially the alarm men, that don't have a good list. So that number is going to beat Woburn pretty soon. And here they are, the final totals that I have in all of my database, 4458. And lo and behold, if you look at the Minutemen and look at the percentage, what do you see there? 25.2. Guess what? The Provincial Congress said set off 25% of your men. Pretty darn close. Here's the 3rd Middlesex Militia. The men from 16 to 60. Colonel Barrett of Barrett's Farm was their leader. Ezekiel Howe, here of Sudbury, was Lieutenant Colonel. Eleazar Brooks of Lincoln was 1st Major. Francis Faulkner of Acton, 2nd Major. And Joseph Hosmer of Concord, Adjutant. These are the field officers of the 3rd Middlesex Militia. Sudbury was part of that. So was Acton, Bedford, Concord, and that was it. And 3rd Middlesex Minutemen, Abijah Pierce of Lincoln was the colonel. So John Nixon, for instance, and Nathaniel Cudworth from Sudbury down below would have been under the command of Abijah Pierce of Lincoln. So about 20,000 responded. 4,400 approximately fought, and Sudbury had 255, plus I found 4 since that. Here we have Barrett's Farm, and I thank Jim Cunningham in our audience here. I could not have this beautiful picture, Jim, without all the wonderful work you did, and so appreciate it. What a marvelous job you did there. And Ezekiel Howe of Sudbury was quoted right at Barrett's Farm. "If any blood has been shed, not one of the rascals shall escape." He found that no blood had been shed, so no shots were fired at Barrett's Farm. And I just think of Mrs. Barrett in this house and the courage that she had to face those companies of British regulars coming out, going through her house, demanding food from her, stealing money from one of her rooms, taking stuff out of her house and burning it. Just must have been terror, but she was an extremely courageous woman. The Sudbury men did not fight at the bridge, as someone just asked. But they did cross the bridge after the British crossed through. And here's the grave of the British soldiers you've all seen, I'm sure, at Concord Bridge. And I thank Tony Howe so much for all of his help, too, and for providing this quote. Mr. Ezekiel Howe, Jr. informed the author that he and his neighbor, Benjamin Barry, ran on east the entire distance to Concord, 12 miles. Now thinking running 12 miles. This is not like the Boston Marathon where you got just a pair of shorts on. You got your full uniform, your full gear, you got lead, lead balls, you've got powder, you've got food, you've got water. I mean, this was quite a marathon. The first object that struck him on his arrival was a British regular weltering in blood. It being his first experience of the horrors of war, he was so shocked that he almost fainted. But, he added, they pushed me along, and a few hours afterward, I could see men dying around me with as much indifference as if they were sheep. So here's where some men entered the fight. I found this in the pensions. I read the soldiers' pensions. It's been a life's work. I've read 2,100 rolls of microfilm so far. I've got 600 more to go, God willing. So many of the men first entered the fight in Concord. We think maybe some at Miriam's Corner, as Dan said, at Hardy's Hill near Brooks Farm. Some didn't make it until Lexington. Two guys, maybe for some reason got delayed. We don't know why Ezekiel Howe was a little late, but he didn't really hit the fight until Lexington. And here is Miriam's Corner looking towards Hardy's Hill, where we're sure the East Sudbury men fought. Where did men exit the fight? This is a lot harder. When did they drop out? They were tired. I mean, they'd already marched, 11, 12 miles. Many of them ran 12 miles. So some of the men, we know one dropped out from his pension. He dropped out in Cambridge. But one guy made it the entire distance to Charlestown Neck before he dropped out. I want to talk a minute about the men of color. Even though there were no men of color in the Sudbury companies the day of April 19th that I could find, so far I found that 60 plus men of color responded to the alarm. And these particular men of color on this list, actually, three of them, the ones in kind of red there, actually fought the British. And two of these three were Minutemen. Now think about that. The Minutemen were considered the elites of their day, kind of like our special forces today. They were specially picked out of the squads by the field officers. So Colonel Barrett would have picked out these Minutemen from his companies. And I have so far 22 African American Minutemen and 25 American Indian Minutemen. So if you think about that, that's pretty darn exciting, and I wish that that kind of spirit had kept up. These men served in integrated units in 1775. When did we become integrated again? We lost it. When did the American Army become integrated once again? Anybody know? Very close. Whoever said 47, 48. President Harry Truman gave an executive order to integrate the Army. President Eisenhower did the full implementation of that. And we had an integrated army in 1775, and these men fought. Sudbury did have two soldiers of color that I could find. They didn't serve at Battle Road, but both of these men served at Bunker Hill. And I know very little about them. There's almost nothing I could find, but we do know their names, and we do know that they were men of color because both of the men in the official records are listed as black. Casualties, here's a list of the 31 towns had casualties. And you can see Sudbury there is number 25. We had two killed, one mortally wounded, and one wounded. And here's one of our men killed, Josiah Haynes. I have stood at this gravesite easily 20 times. I have so much reverence for this man, and I've never noticed this. Chuck just told us about this. Chuck Zimmer, is it? Yes. Right here. Yep. Look at the top of his gravestone. I've stood there and I never noticed it. There's Deacon Josiah Haynes. Now, normally when you go out in a graveyard and see a gravestone like this, the early Puritan gravestones have a winged skull showing the spirit going up to heaven. Later on, they kind of took away the skull. It was a little too tough, I guess, and they have these fat little cherubs in that spot. But here in Sudbury, you have an actual image of a man, and I've never seen this before, and I thank Chuck for showing it. And here is Deacon Haynes, probably. Asa Reed, we don't have his stone, hoping it will be found when the cemetery is worked on. He's probably buried right outside. Thomas Bent was from East Sudbury. He was wounded. He was on horseback. He was in the exempts, the alarm. And as he was riding back wounded, lo and behold, one of his sons, 4 of his sons fought that day. And one of his sons happened to be coming down the same road and said, "Dad, I'm going to take you back home and take care of you." And said, "Son, you go on to the battle. I will make my way back home." And he did. And he died of his wound that summer. And I noticed a few years back, his wife is, you see a double gravestone like this? That's a man and a wife died very close to each other. They died on the same day. And I've asked a lot of people what happened. It was probably the grief and the shock and the long-term care of this man who was wounded at Lexington and Concord. And Joshua Haynes was wounded. I tracked him down in Washington, New Hampshire, and found his grave up there to show for you. Just some notes, kind of random notes. This is from the Thomas Stearns manuscript. The militia companies followed the example of the Minutemen and performed nearly an equal share of duty without pay, training by moonlight or drilling in squads by the light of a lantern on the barn floor. They were training in very cold weather, and they would train in barns, and they had a lantern on the floor. Now, I've trained in a lot nicer places. Training is pretty hard, and I just give them so much credit. 2 spies that were sent out by General Gage to reconnoiter this whole area actually went through Sudbury, and they got to Framingham, and they actually got there the same time. We're in the tavern eating when the Framingham militia started training right outside. They were really worried, but never saw each other. But didn't they have a great laugh about these militia? Kind of bumbling, fumbling fools, they kind of called them. I think they later, and de Bernier, one of the spies, did later eat his words. He said, "I never could imagine the bravery of these men." And here he was laughing at them, fumbling and bumbling. Up, up, the redcoats are up as far as Concord. If you wonder what was said here in Sudbury for the alarm, as far as we know, this is it. And this is from General John Nixon's great-granddaughter. Up, up, the redcoats are up as far as Concord. The youngest soldier who fought that day from Sudbury area, Aaron Haynes, Jr., 16 years old. It was his birthday. It was the day when he could become an official soldier, and guess what? He was probably most excited to do it. A little afraid, I'm sure, too. And the oldest, Josiah Haynes. One of the things that I do in my study is try to find what generation these were men from the original ancestor. And so here's the chart, and it's pretty stark, I think. These were very established families. Look at these, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and even 1/8 generation family sending men. Most common family names within this group of soldiers, you can read them. This just popped out at me yesterday. I was thinking, were there father-son combinations? I've done a long study of Lexington Green, and there were 7 father-son combinations on the green that day. And here, there were many, many in Sudbury, many more. I didn't even have time to check them all. But you have the largest family contingent of any town serving together. Elisha Wheeler Sr. served that day with his brother Jonas and 6 sons. That's the record. No other town has 6 sons fighting together with their father. Where did these soldiers go and where did they die? I've done the farthest north, farthest east, farthest south, farthest west. North, Waitsfield, Vermont. East, Frankfort, Maine. South, Charleston, South Carolina. and West Belpre, Ohio. So they really spread out from Sudbury. They served at Bunker Hill. Here's an old map of Charlestown. I'll show you here a picture. This is Monument Street coming off from the monument. This is where the breastwork was. There was a fort on top of the hill and a breastwork. This was a pile of dirt about as high as your chest that men could stand behind it. It went right down this street. Then there was a rail fence about a quarter of a mile away, which is now at the Bunker Hill Burying Ground. And there's the marker for the rail fence. Between this breastwork and the rail fence was called the Gap. There was nothing there except fields. This is where the Sudbury men took their positions. And they were kind of exposed there, not having breastwork and not having even a rail fence. And so they made some little redoubts of their own very, very quickly. They fought at the rail fence. And do you have your laser pointer? Yeah. Right here. Thanks. Here's Charlestown Peninsula. Here's Boston. Here's Charlestown burning. The British burned it down. Here's the fort where the monument is now. You can see the breastwork coming off the side of the fort. That's Monument Avenue. Here's the rail fence. You can see patriots all behind the rail fence and see the British advancing on it. This area here, between the breastwork and the rail fence, was where the Sudbury men were. So if you want to go visit that someday, you've got it marked out for you. Sudbury lost two men that day, Isaac Loker, who was a brother of the captain of horse, and Joshua Haynes, not the same Joshua Haynes as was wounded, but a different Joshua Haynes. And wounded was our own Colonel John Nixon, a very severe wound in the groin. This man was leading out in front all the time, right there. When the monument was, the cornerstone was laid in 1825, they invited all of the old veterans who were still alive to come to the ceremony and be honored. And Sudbury sent 4 men who served also on April 19th. So imagine these old soldiers at this cornerstone laying, Aaron Haynes Jr., Abel Parmenter, Edmund Rice Jr., and Nathaniel Rice. Final statistics. These men of the April 19th contingent all died in the service, and you can see they served all the way from Bunker Hill to White Plains area, to the Battle of Saratoga, Stillwater, to Yorktown, Virginia. And the average ages of death of these men, Sudbury, actually, there must be something pretty good in the water in the town because they lived pretty darn good. The average age, I have deaths of 145 men, and the average age is 71.3. And these are the last 10 survivors of the April 19th contingent. The last man from Sudbury died in 1848. The last man of all 4,000 was from Lexington. He died in 1856, so it was pretty close. And they fought in freedom's cause. And I thank you very, very much. Dan and I both thank you very much.
If there are questions, first of all, anyone who says statistics and charts are dull, they should be at this. This was anything but dull. This was fantastic. So I'm sure there are lots of questions, and Lee could be our roving microphone here.
Questions? Yes, Ellen. George, do you have any idea where Colonel Ezekiel Howe, no, General John Nixon is buried?
That is a great question, because I have searched and searched for this man. I've been to Middlebury, Vermont, I think 3 times looking for his grave. That's where he died. I've checked every cemetery. I went to the Historical Society. No one knew. And that's all I can say is, you must know that it's a pretty hard one to find, or you wouldn't have asked. Or how have you...
I'm in contact with one of his descendants, and she's been searching in Vermont and Sudbury, and we can't find him.
I have searched for years. You would think a general would have a grave, but...
And he may, right out here. We'll find him.
Still on John Nixon, I believe he recovered from his wound,
Yes.
and he went on to serve under Washington. At least that's what I've read.
Yeah, he served in the New York campaign in '76. He served in the Saratoga campaign of '77. As a matter of fact, at Saratoga, a cannonball went by his head. And you would think, well, he made it, you know, but the concussion was so strong that it would kill a lot of men just going by you. And it damaged his eyesight on one side and ruined his hearing. So he was not only wounded at Bunker Hill, he was injured at Saratoga. And Washington, rather than taking him with him to Valley Forge or Monmouth or any of those campaigns, had him stay and protect the Hudson Highlands. He was worried that the British would try to go north and cut off the colonies.
How did the battle for Breed's Hill become Bunker Hill?
Originally, they were going to, Bunker Hill is a bigger hill, more north. Originally, the plan was to fortify Bunker's Hill. There was a last-minute decision to go forward closer to the British and fortify Breed's Hill. Reading the pensions of the soldiers, almost to a man, they all call it the Battle of Bunker Hill. It just ended up sticking as Bunker Hill. I guess that's what they were told they were going to in the beginning, and they didn't know the name of the other hill, and it just stuck. It's actually Breed's Hill.
Thank you, George. Don't sit down. I've got a question. The question is about Ezekiel Howe, who, as you pointed out, was Lieutenant Colonel of the 3rd Militia Regiment. Following that, after the beginning of the Revolutionary War, he became Colonel of the 4th Middlesex Regiment. What part did he play in the Revolutionary War after that time, or did he?
That I don't really know, Tony. Maybe someone else can answer.
I believe he trained all the people that were going to war after. He had wounds from, I think, the French and Indian War. So he trained all the people that were required by Sudbury to go to the Revolution. I think it's in the archives. Check around.
I believe he had a local command. Many of these did, and that's all I can say. Like a home force.
Any more questions? There's no one here from the Historic Commission, I see. Pardon? We have maps to sell behind you, and books, and all about Sudbury. I don't know why that is. But the Historic Commission has, with your good graces of the voters, have you, with the CPA money, I'm sorry, with the CPA money going to, this year, from what I know, will be digging up the flattened gravestones that are out there. They had only 446 stones, but there's 976 people buried there. And the maintenance has always been bad in any antique graveyard like that, and they break the stone and they lay it down and they cover it with sod. So we know that the stones are there. Hopefully, a lot of people will be found.
Okay, again, so much thanks to both Dan and to George. And thanks for staying. This is a long meeting, but with our annual meeting, but this was just fantastic. And maybe we can get Dan and George to stick around a few more minutes during the refreshments, and we can chat with them, and perhaps you have your own individual questions. But again, a hand for just one of the best programs we've ever had.